Hi, everybody. This is Rose Odette with the Michigan Innovation Podcast. And today we have Bill Palladino, one of the stars from Traverse City, with us down here in Cadillac. How you doing today, Bill?
I'm awesome. How are
Oh,
you?
I'm so happy to have you here. I've been coaxing him to come down to Cadillac for probably a couple months now, and we finally were able to fit it in the schedule. He's such a busy guy, working and so has so many things going on, helping out the community in Traverse City, helping out Oops in Traverse City, helping with TC New Tech, and a lot of startups. And I just know everyone values you. You
Oh,
do so much for the community.
thanks.
We
Thank you.
really appreciate, and I appreciate it, even though I'm kind of a newbie here in Traverse City, being from Cadillac, but you guys have really welcomed me and I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Why not extend our arms as far as Cadillac? That's a pretty easy reach for us.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, and Bill has an amazing company called Krios Consulting, been at it for several years, has a lot of expertise in that area. But what we always do on the podcast, it's all about people. And so before we jump into the business side of the house, we're going to go in and meet a little bit, what makes Bill tick? What's going on with Bill? Like, where are you from? What's your background? And how'd you jump into Michigan? And tell us a little bit about you.
Gosh, I don't know if you want to start way back, but for all my Michigan friends, I'm actually a New Yorker. So I grew up in the Bronx, New York, went to school in North Dakota at North Dakota State University, go Bison, and drifted my way eastward through the decades here and worked in Minnesota and then moved to Beaver Island, Michigan in 1990.
Wow, that's different. I've
Yeah,
never met anybody that lived on Beaver Island. I vacationed there for a weekend and it was
yeah,
just gorgeous, but
yeah.
you lived there.
Lived
Wow.
there full time for 10 years and
10 years.
brought my consulting practice from Minneapolis to that place. That's where I started my consulting business, Krios Consulting, and that would have been in 1990. So I've been doing that um, off and on. I've had years where I've been hired to do some other work here and there, but for the most part, I've always been able to come back to that business. And my heart and soul is really in providing support to others to make their creative endeavors possible and help them execute those dreams and visions that they
Wow, that sounds awesome. So you were born in the
have.
Bronx. Wow. How long did you live in the Bronx?
18 years till I went to college.
Wow, you seem so un-Bronx to me.
Well, put me in a taxi cab in New York, and about 10 seconds later, you'll hear the accent
Oh
coming
my
off through and
gosh.
through for sure.
That's amazing.
But I don't bring it out on normal occasions. So.
A very, very varied background and so interesting. And so Krios Consulting, what a really cool name. How did you come up with the name of your business, Krios Consulting?
That's a really good question. Um, I had actually, when I decided to really formally uh, put some effort into the business in terms of marketing, I decided to put the naming of the business in the hands of professional marketers. And I hired a firm in Traverse City that's no longer around, but they were really at the top of their game. And I gave them my background and what I was going to be doing and said, I would really like you folks to figure out a name for the business. And when I went back to the meeting where they had done all this work, the very first, and this was, they'd come up with logos and marketing plans, the whole routine. And they came up with three options for me. And the first was Palladino Consulting, my name. And thought, well, that's really nice. And they really tried to sell me on the uniqueness of the name and
It is a good
how,
name.
at
I
least,
really like that name.
well, you have to understand that in the Bronx, Palladino is kind of like Smith.
Okay.
So in the 6 block walk between the number 6 train station and my house in the Bronx, you pass by Palladino's Pizzeria and Palladino's used cars and Palladino's insurance company, none of whom were my relatives. So
Oh my
give
gosh.
you an idea, it's a very
That's
different place. And there's actually another Palladino in Traverse City.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
isn't that
he's
funny?
been a teacher at St. Francis High School for many years. Anyway, I was not really interested in going that route. I wanted something more powerful. I wanted a name that was more powerful in my eyes. And the next one up was Krios.
Hmm.
And when they brought it to me, they had a whole logo and the whole works to show me. And my eyes lit up immediately and I had a big smile on my face. And I said, you need to go no further. That's the one.
Wow.
And what they hadn't realized, I asked them, how did you come upon that name, Krios, Krios? Um, and they said, well, Krios is a Roman god connected as the god of leadership. And I said, absolutely, that's 100%. That's
Wow.
awesome. And I said, is that it? And they said, yeah, we went right for that. So, do you understand the connection to my last name?
Mm-mm.
And they said, no. I said, well, you have to understand that Krios is the son of the goddess Athena.
Okay.
The goddess Athena is also known as Pallas, Pallas.
Wow.
Pallas is the root of my name, Palladino. And
Really?
they had no
Oh,
idea when they did that. So
that
that's how
is
that came about.
so,
Yeah.
that sounds so
It
mythological.
is very mythological
Oh, I
and
love that.
and I'll
That
take it.
and being I've taken 3 years of Latin,
Mhm.
and so we had to do a lot of deep dives
Sure.
into all that Roman and Greek mythology. So I follow you a little bit closer than you may think. That is very, very cool.
So in that mythology, Krios would be the brother of a god you may know better, which is Kronos.
Right.
So Kronos and Krios are brothers in that
Oh,
mythology.
that is, I'm
Yeah.
just loving that name. That I am with you. That would have been a
Right?
slam dunk.
Don't go any further.
Slam dunk on the name. Well, good for them. There's probably the myth of maybe the god Krios had something to do with it too. No, who knows?
No.
Wow, so that's cool. The figuring out the name. I love those anecdotal stories because it really is. It's our history and
Yeah,
how we begin.
sure.
And so with let's talk about Krios.
Mhm.
Let's talk about your consulting practice.
Mhm.
Where does Krios really fall in the area of, is it business consulting? Is it solopreneur consulting, startup
Sure.
consulting? Tell us more about your
Sure.
consulting business.
So generally, I started the consulting practice as a general consulting business that you would ordinarily understand as consulting, which is meeting facilitation, strategic planning, visioning, things of that nature. Um, but that became a little bit too generic, and everybody seemed to be doing that work. So through some relationships I built over the years, I began to create niches that my work folded into. And those niches came through the introduction of work with a specific set of authors that I both was a fan of and read and then met. And so I began to dive fairly deeply into a specific subject area set. The first was I met and worked very closely with an author by the name of Joel Barker from St. Paul, Minnesota, who is known as a futurist, which first of all, when I met him, like, how do I get that title?
How do you
Is
become
there
that?
is there a school to go to become a futurist? Uh,
So Joel
Joel
Barker.
Barker was and he's still out there. He Joel really coined the term um, paradigms of business. So paradigms had been talked about in the world of science and technology for years, but Joel really penned the idea that the paradigms that we get stuck in, the comfort zones that we as businesses fall into, tend to prevent us. Those paradigms create biases that we then choose to look through the lens of and see the world, and they prevent us from seeing the greater possibilities out there. So Joel created a whole system and set of practices designed to showcase how we can see the future better
Mm.
if we set our biases aside. And one of the ways he chose to do that was to really look at the power of group thinking, but in a very structured manner. In fact, his processes are patented. And one of those was something called the implications wheel, which I was first introduced to when I worked at the small business development centers here in Michigan. We used to use his implications wheel to help businesses imagine the future of a product or a new direction for their business. And I was so impressed by it, I ended up using it quite a bit up here in northern Michigan and around the state of Michigan, and began to publish a lot on that work. And uh, I got a phone call one day from somebody who had read some of the work I had published on the website of the Small Business Development Center. And they asked if I'd be interested in meeting Joel and talking to him more. And so a year later, I went off and started the business with him and some of his partners
Wow.
to further that work. So
Mm.
that's how I really kind of dove into a subset of this work. So that work was envisioning, and futuring, and scenario planning. So in that work and scenario planning, I got to do all this amazing work with NASA, with the U.S. Army, with CDC. We did something in 2000, between 2007 and 2009. If you remember when the bird flu pandemic was first hitting,
I do.
the CDC hired us to do this work on what were the potential outcomes of bird flu becoming pandemic. Now, imagine that now after 2020,
Right.
right?
Wow. Yeah.
And so one of the biggest outcomes of that, we got to travel around the country collecting data from hundreds and hundreds of people. And one of the biggest outcomes of that was that instantly upon a pandemic occurring, the biggest challenge would be in finding enough masks. And it's exactly what happened.
Oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened.
That was back in 2008 or 9 that we
Wow.
that. Anyway, so that was Joel Barker, who's still out there doing great work. Look him up, joelbarker.com or implicationswheel.com. Some great stuff he's got there.
Implications wheel. That's interesting. I do remember those days when Paradigm, everyone, back in the corporate environment, we were talking, and I was at IBM at the time, and they were talking about the paradigm shift, and we had to do a little bit of nothing as extensive as what you're discussing, but I do remember we went to a week-long retreat at Higgins Lake. They had Higgins Lake has this DNR facility, and IBM was lucky enough to get it for a week, and they took us through what they called transformational leadership. And that's when I learned about paradigm shifts.
Could very well have been Joel's content. Probably. That was really his world at the time.
Yeah, back in those days. And it did impact me quite a bit. It really does open your eyes to what you can become when you need to transition, because IBM was going through some tough times in the early 90s, and it was before Lou Gerstner joined the firm, and I left them shortly thereafter and started my own. But that's amazing. So after Joel, and he's still at it, and he's an author, so I'm sure he's still out there on Amazon if people want.
You can certainly find his work for sure.
Okay.
On those two websites that I said, joelbarker.com and implicationswheel.com. You can probably find that information.
Fantastic. Wow, that's really cool.
But that was at the time I had been working with the small business development centers, and I left there to help start this other company down in Dallas, Texas, with a group of folks who were all in leadership development and training. And I became one of a core group of people whose job it was to take the work of people like Joel Barker, best-selling business authors, and to take their work and to create workshops that can be driven inside organizations. So Joel was the first of our authors that we did that with, and we created training and workshops. So a lot of time looking at their intellectual property, immersing ourselves in their intellectual property, and then turning that into 4-hour, 8-hour, 2-day workshops that could then be delivered inside organizations. And that was the basis of the business. And we then went, Joel, our biggest author at the time that we added would have been John Cotter. And John is known, if you look up change management, you will probably see a picture of John Cotter. He's a Harvard professor who wrote some of the fundamental work on change management in corporations and organizations. And we partnered with John Cotter to take his work on leading change and translate all of that intellectual property into a series of workshops that would allow businesses to train their staff on how to create a culture of change within their organization. So a change-ready culture. So rather than to fix problems, the idea is to understand how change management works and to create a culture that allows change to be this flow that just is a river that happens inside the organization rather than something you have to apply and fix every single time. And that was a very successful program. And Dr. Cotter is still out there doing that work. I think he's retired now from Harvard, but his Cotter International company is still out there.
Wow, that's amazing. And how would a company engage? Would they realize that they needed to change and they would approach you, or how did you engage?
Yeah, great question. So our business at the time, we selected business authors who already had standing in the business community.
Okay.
So often what would happen is John Cotter would give a speech at a conference of 3,000 people, say. So you go to Las Vegas and give a convention of healthcare leaders, 3,000 healthcare leaders. And in the back of the room, there'd be all of his books. And the CEOs go back there, and you've been there, right? They bought a bunch of books. But instead of just buying the books, what John could then say is, please go buy my books. But if you're really interested in executing these ideas inside your organization, go talk to those guys.
Okay.
They provide workshops on my material.
Okay.
So there's a partnership there.
Right.
It became a marketing partnership where we really relied on the coattails of the authors that we selected to be able to sell these products inside organizations that were already interested in the intellectual property.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like it was met a lot of needs at the time, because you never can. Change is inevitable and it's going to come at you. And when you're in a leadership position, it can be daunting because they still have to answer to the profit and loss statements but then foster change. So that can be a landmine if you're not following some type of rigorous process.
Well, one of the big lessons that we learn in change management is that change, whether it's negative or positive, offers the same resistance. So people misunderstand change. They believe that people only resist negative change. Resist positive change as well. So if, for instance, we were hired to come in and work with Rolls-Royce Corporation. They had just purchased Allison Engine and Transmission in Indianapolis. They had this factory next to the racetrack and the airport in Indianapolis. They were looking to take the staff from that factory and transfer a lot of the administration people and the non-factory people to a brand new building downtown. They knew. So there's a positive change.
Sure, brand new building.
We're going to take you out of this
Rolls-Royce is so prestigious.
That's right. We're going to give you this beautiful, shiny new building downtown. You can help us design it.
Wow.
They were smart enough to understand that even that positive potential, people would resist.
Right.
Because they would go, kind of like my desk.
Sure.
Or what happens to Sharon? I kind of like having
Yeah,
lunch with
hanging
Sharon
out,
every day.
right. Right.
So
Well,
we were brought in to teach them that
yeah,
and then prepare the staff for the the potential of those resistances occurring as we transition to the new
that's
model.
so forward thinking. You know, when I do my work in innovation, and I'm always surprised by this statistic, and kind of plays to what you're saying right there, is that if you have a new innovative idea, 5% of the people that you work with will be on board and be enthusiastic. 5% will be, they won't sabotage you, but 80 to 90% will not want it to happen.
Oh, there's sabotage. Oh, there is sabotage. Don't underestimate that.
And so, but then at the end of the day, that's because people don't like change.
That's yeah. And just think about it. So imagine you've been working at a company for 5 years, and the boss comes and says, "Hey, we're going to give you a promotion," and the promotion comes with a shiny new office on the fourth floor. And your first thing is, "Woohoo!"
Right.
You call your spouse, "Hey, honey, I just got a promotion. How cool is that?" And you sit back for a minute, you realize, I like this desk.
Right.
I like these people.
Mm.
And then maybe, I want to take this with me.
Right.
And then suddenly the little resistances come in and
Mhm.
at the very least, slows down the transition.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a macro of how it feels in any kind of
Yeah.
change management scenario.
You're very good at explaining that. That was a very good, I mean, I could feel it. I could feel the emotion, not only losing my desk, losing my friends, maybe that I see on a daily basis, but now he's going upstairs, and you're not one of us anymore.
That's right. Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
So I see here you're a scientist at heart. Tell me about that. I never knew that about you.
Well, my background in my first career was in broadcasting. As a broadcast journalist, but also as a broadcast engineer. So I'm at heart, I'm a nerd. Let's just face it.
Aren't we all?
Yeah.
I
So,
confess as well.
and that nerddom tends to show its face in my work in that I want to record, first analyze and record all the instances of a process so that I can come back at the end and measure if the process is working. And because of my engineering background, it gave me a fairly astute framework to put that in. And so the way that sits is I tend to look at everything as an experiment. And in an experiment, first thing you need to do is um, articulate your hypothesis. So, what is it you expect when you initiate this product or this change or this business idea? And you articulate what that hypothesis is. And this is what I believe will happen when we do this. And this is when I believe it will happen. And you commit. That's what a scientist does. You
The scientific method.
You don't guess. Exactly. You don't guess an
Right.
experiment. You put down, you articulate what
Right.
your hypothesis of record is.
Yes.
That becomes the Bible for every decision you make going forward. And you use that hypothesis to then create the experiment itself. What of this hypothesis do I need to use to measure so that I will understand more? If you hear about that, listen closely there. It's about understanding. It's not about winning. It's not about succeeding. It's about how can I design this to learn as much as possible about this process, whether it's good or bad. So that's part of that. So you have to articulate that. And then the next thing you like to do is you design that experiment. What do you need to measure? And then something that businesses often don't do, and that I learned a lot from Joel Barker about, was also articulating your biases. What are the things that I believe in that might get in the way of me understanding the truth? And so that's what scientists do as well. hey, look, here's the thing. I happen to spend years in public broadcasting, so I am probably going to lean toward more of a visual record of marketing. So I know going in, well, when I'm meeting with Bill, he is probably going to lean more towards the visual and audio side of this marketing piece.
Mhm.
So now I know. So
Wow.
all of us need to do that. What are the potential biases we have that might steer me away from the truth?
Mm.
And once you do that, now the experiment begins in earnest. Now you can say, all right, let's start this experiment. And then you run the experiment,
Mhm.
you measure it, reset and learn, do it again.
Right.
It's not about winning. It's not about committing to an idea. It's, is the idea workable?
Right.
Answer may be no. And that might be the best thing to learn from this
Mm.
thing. Or it might be, it worked out pretty good, but let's tweak this one thing.
Wow. That's very, very well said. And it does take, think about the scientific method. We're taught that in school. So I bet you get a lot of buy-in from people
Oh, yeah.
because it's something that we love being objective, even though we're not. We love the idea of following a a process that everyone has learned, hey, this is a very believable process. And I think coming at it from that angle is so helpful, and it sounds like it's ingrained in your DNA.
It is for me, and you're correct, it's sometimes hard for organizations. Organizations hear it and they like it, they seem to appreciate it, but committing the time it takes to do that properly is often the challenge. So in my work, I tend to focus on creating that observational point of view, creating that experiment from beginning to end, so that people understand this isn't just me coming in and observing something. It's us designing this together, and so that we can learn how this process works. And then what we tend to see is once we teach that to a group of people inside an organization, they begin to use that over and over
Mm,
in other things that they do.
mm,
Want to buy a new telephone system? What are our biases?
mm.
Well, I'm kind of biased for American products. Well, I'm kind of biased for Japanese products. Well, I have a bias for black phones versus white phones. Literally, that's the stuff you need to put on the table so that you can see the truth when it comes in front of
Right. Wow. Yeah, and it takes a while, I imagine. I would think, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but for someone to be comfortable to admit those biases, because that is admitting vulnerability.
you. In the business world, vulnerability is something you don't want to admit because we live in a very paternalistic view of how you succeed in business, which is, I know everything I need to know to move forward. Your job is just to listen to me. Science tells us that actually isn't the best way to
No,
approach things,
right.
but we're still teaching our kids that nature of business. So it to suggest to people that you can move ahead fast, but at the same time still learn is a critical thing for people to understand.
Yeah, and how do you approach a person like if you working in an organ? I know you work with large organizations, healthcare organizations, and I think that there's probably 20 to 30 department heads in a hospital, and above that you've got 15 C-level executives and a lot of egos, and now we're talking about vulnerability. Being in the business as long as you have, what are some tips and techniques you use to like give them the comfort to be vulnerable or to really put some of those things aside and tell us your biases? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, can we write our consulting agreement now so I can give you all my secrets?
Oh, okay. If that's your secret sauce, so no
No,
problem.
I think, as in any project, from a consulting perspective, we know getting buy-in from as high up the ladder as possible first. That's really critical so that people understand the value of this work that we're considering. Um, and then to teach people that it's within their power to do whatever they can to make it succeed up to their level of reach. What tends to get in people's way is they try to reach beyond their the box
Mm,
that their job is designed to fit in.
mhm.
And that gets them either in trouble used to being outside the box.
Mhm.
Or so what we like to do is get buy-in from as high up as we possibly can. Show people the framework within which they are designed and allowed.
Mhm.
We hear a lot of in the business. One of the catchphrases we hear a lot of is empowerment. And one of the first things in my classes that I do is I ask people the definition of empowerment.
Mm.
And what you'll hear is freedom to move, freedom to be creative, tacit approval of anything I can do. And the big thing people need to understand about being empowered is to understand the framework within which that is designed. So if I'm told you're empowered to do whatever you can, that might get you in trouble.
Right.
If I'm told you have the power to do whatever you can inside this frame,
Mhm.
now
You know your
I'm
boundaries.
focused on
Mhm.
this.
Mhm.
So that's the thing we usually start with.
That's really cool.
And,
Thank you.
and that allows the CEO or the boss, whoever it is, to say, I love this idea. Don't let it get away with it. Don't let it get in the way of all these other things.
Good. Very
And
good.
it's a kind of a critical
That
thing
was a
we
good
see.
answer.
All right, fair enough. I like good
That's a
answers.
really good answer. So I wanted to ask you, or mention that everyone's talking innovation, innovation, innovation these days. And what I really like about our chat so far, really haven't brought that up that much. You brought up change management, paradigm shifting, some of the terminology that has been used through the years. And now we're in an age where those words are being replaced by the word innovation. And so what do you think is different now? You've been at change for a long time, and that's
Sure.
AKA innovation. What's new and different? Why is innovation so hot right now?
Yeah, great question. I think innovation is hot now because of the emphasis we have on the startup culture. This idea that you take something, an idea, and you move fast with it, and you experiment, and you test, and you move on.
And fail
Previously,
fast.
fail fast,
Right.
yeah. Um, Previously, innovation was something um, that big organizations tried to do and typically failed horribly at it. And they were trying to emulate the way that smaller businesses act. And that's why, I mean, I love that your work and my work tends to involve smaller businesses
Mhm.
because we have a distinct advantage from large corporations. We have the ability to move very adroitly. We can move really swiftly and with a lot of flexibility and not get in trouble for it. Large organizations struggle with innovation. And it's one of the things that when I work with big organizations, it's one of the first things we have to work with them on is um, most people believe that innovation is having a great idea. And I can describe this for you. Um, there is a big manufacturer of automobiles that we all know and love, that I won't mention who it is. Needless to say, it's
One of three.
yes, one of three that we know well in this state. And we were brought in to teach them innovation culture. And it was at one point the chief of engineering, or I forget who the actual title was proudly going to show us their vault of innovation,
Hmm.
which was literally under lock and key.
Hmm.
And we had to go through this whole security process where we left all of our phones and computers, and all USB drives, anything that could record anything. We were brought downstairs into this room where this vault was open, and we were shown a room full of 3-leaf binders, 20,000 innovations.
Wow.
You know, and I know that you can't have 20,000 innovations. What they had were 20,000,
Mm.
which were worth how much?
Maybe the paper it's written on?
Less,
Right.
because they spent a lot of money.
Mm.
So what we have to understand that ideas are just that, they're ideas. That innovation comes from taking those ideas and executing them to a successful outcome. And most organizations don't understand that. They spend a lot of time and effort in just generating ideas and telling you how cool it is that they, hey, we give you 25 minutes a day to think of new ideas, to be innovative.
Mm.
And that's just not cutting it. Part of the lessons we learned, and this is some of the work I did with Dartmouth professors, authors, Vijay Govindarajan and Chris Trimble, they wrote a whole series on, they researched businesses, large organizations um, who were successful at innovation, and more importantly, who failed miserably at innovation. And through their work, we learned what works and what doesn't work when you want to create a culture of innovation that can take ideas and take them to a successful outcome for the organization they work within. The challenge with innovation, the big challenge, is that by nature, innovation is new. And their definition of innovation is anything that is new and has an uncertain outcome for the organization. So where organizations tend to misunderstand that is they read it only as something that's new. But it has to have an uncertain outcome, because if it's new and has a certain outcome, you're just tweaking little. So what we try to do is imagine something that's new, has an uncertain outcome, and create a pathway for that innovation that not only creates this new innovation, but also doesn't get in the way of the big organization's money-making ventures. Because what tends to happen is people will start innovations and then it starts to cost them money. The moment that innovation process gets in the way of doing normal business, guess what's going to happen? That big organization is going to quash down on it, and it's going to suck that thing into the big organization, and it's not going to have a chance of succeeding. So what we teach is a process where we spin off that innovation team. It has a different set of rules, a different strategy, maybe even different titles, maybe even different financial incentives. Because a financial incentive of a big corporation is very different from one that needs to be fast and learn fast. Financial incentives of big corporations are, don't get in the way of the money coming in the door. The way we make money is to be repeatable, do it over and over again, least cost. Be more efficient,
Well, back when I was developing our electronic medical record in the early days, we were lucky enough to start working with Plant Moran, and they showed us some really cool tax advantages at that time that would take every single one of our expenditures that went into the development of our new innovative product. And man, that year we ended up saving like $70,000 on our taxes. And so, you're right that it is expensive to innovate, and it's very important to bring people in that know what they're talking about innovation. Like you just explained an amazing procedure to do innovative problem solving and ideas, and kind of siloing it away so that it's protected and that the people can do what they need to do. But at the same time, there are ways to bring in financial, kind of protect those small businesses from experience. Yes, having all of that. And that was a really, really interesting experience that I felt personally. And I was really excited that we were able to bring in a consultant to help us look at what we were doing from an innovative perspective. And I completely support, what you're doing, the Krios and consulting, and helping people understand that, hey, you can still run the core business, but also have a creative department, or we used to call it R&D. Would you say it's different than the traditional research and development, or would you say it's a different department?
Yeah, it's to really do it well. So Govindarajan and Trimble have an idea that they call the performance engine. So the performance engine is the part of any big business that actually brings in the money, pay our salaries, keep our customers happy. Anything that gets in the way of that performance engine can be a challenge. So we have to create a partnership between this innovation enterprise. It needs to be able to operate as independently as feasibly possible, to look different, to feel different, to allow people within that organization to feel like they can do whatever it takes to create this innovation process, right? But it cannot get in the way of that performance engine. So R&D can be troublesome because R&D's purpose is to serve the performance engine.
Okay.
So what will tend to happen is an innovative idea gets put through the filter of the big organization. It just becomes another one of
I
the
follow
ideas
you.
to
So
serve the big
that's where you have these innovation centers, and they have a whole separate entity.
Yeah, and you've heard of like skunk works,
Yeah,
and
Skunk
so
Works.
it's like that, except skunk works are like one piece where they really have no accountability to the bigger organization. What we're talking about is creating like a skunk works with like a bridge between them that's
Okay.
constantly talking to each other, that's constantly explaining to the performance engine why they're special, why they get treated differently,
Mm-hmm.
why they get measured differently in their performance reviews, and why the outcomes of this innovation will serve them better in the end. This will create a new product.
That's brilliant. That's just really brilliant. I love that. That's amazing. I also know I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit. We are like so together with this whole innovation idea. I
Sure.
think the difference is that I do most of my work online and you do most of your work in person. So we're a good team.
Okay.
Okay, and so the other thing you and I have in common is this whole thing about positive psychology, and I call it different. I have a lot of I do a lot of reading in the area of personal development, and it crosses over, of course, to positive psychology. I have a whole wall full of heroes. I call them my heroes, like Brian Tracy, I and Tony Robbins, Brendan Burchard, you name them. And I can go deep in a lot of these guys. And but I think when you come at positive psychology, you come from a more of a professional approach, whereas I come from more of a self-help approach. So could you share with us your positive psychology um, component?
Yeah, that's it's a really you've picked the point to discuss because um, historically, positive psychology has been put into the subcategory of self. So
Hmm.
if you went to a library or a bookstore to find out books on positive psychology, it would literally send you to the self-help section.
Right,
And self-help, it it it, it created this feeling of it wasn't real science,
right.
that it was just people. I feel this is how it would help you. And positive psychology, 25 years ago or so, had a very distinct turn in how it was looked upon in the scientific community. Suddenly, for the first time ever, we were able to study how our brains work without first people dying and us having to cut them open to see their brains. Through fMRI, magnetic resonance imaging, we are now able to look inside our brains as our brains are operating to
Hmm.
see how they work.
Mm.
And so that was really the advent of this new science of positive psychology. And it truly is a science. And so there are a whole legion now of positive psychology advocates out there in universities all across the world who are now deepening our knowledge of how neuroscience, how our brains work, how our brains create new neural pathways, and how that relates to our brain's ability to see the world differently. And if our brains can start with a more positive aspect, our brains are much more capable of developing new positive pathways. So that's kind of the basis of it. We've only known that for the last 20 or 25 years.
I totally appreciate where you're coming from. Back in, I think it was 2010 or 2011, I went out to California and I took both of my sons, David and Brian, and we had our brain scanned. And we didn't have the fMRI because that wasn't out yet. We had a PET scan in the Amen Clinic. Are you aware of Dr.
Yeah.
Amen? He has clinics all over the country, and he's always on PBS. He's written about 50 books on brain scanning. And it was interesting because before I went out there, I really studied the anatomy of the brain. So I looked at the deep limbic system, the singular gyrus, and found out where does depression land, and that's in the deep limbic, and where is anxiety, it's in the basal ganglia, and where is, OCD, and, everyone has a little bit of all of those things. And when they did the brain scan, I could actually see in the PET scan, you can see it's red hot
Right.
where you are depressed. It shows where your anxiety lies, which is different than OCD, which is a total different part of the brain.
It's amazing.
I know, I couldn't believe it. And they sent us home with these beautiful images, and it really did help me understand why do I have these feelings? Where are they coming from? How come, because if you break your arm, you have an x-ray and you can see that. But when you can see through, and I've never had have you ever had an fMRI?
No.
I haven't, but I've watched them do sort of some of the testing, YouTube, but it is fascinating.
Yeah,
It
really
is so fascinating.
So, person who's known as the father of positive psychology is Marty Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania. And so he coined the phrase positive psychology and really put it on the map.
Mm-hmm.
And since then has a lot of people who have followed him. There's Barbara Fredrickson from UCLA or USC. Sorry, California. Barbara's terrific. Sonia Lyubomirsky. Some great psychologists who've really studied how our brains work, and how we can use the knowledge of how our brains work to better serve us individually. And I think the power of understanding positive psychology for businesses is that when we teach positive psychology, the tools and the skill sets involved with using positive psychology, we're teaching individuals to serve themselves. So unlike other professional development, and this is what I've done for my whole life, is teach adults. For the first time, this work in positive psychology, I walk into a classroom of 30 or 50 or 500 people, and I look at them and I can say, this work is for you. This work is designed for you to understand your brain better so that you can become happier yourself. The residual benefits to the business are just residual. And it changes everybody. This isn't about teaching a spreadsheet or change management. This is about individuals. And what happens is people leave understanding that, wow, I gained something from myself.
Awesome.
For the first time in my life, I get messages from my clients from home saying things like, you're not going to believe this, but I just sat down at the dinner table with my 15-year-old and I used what you taught me in class. It worked. And you don't get that from teaching Excel spreadsheets.
No way. You don't. That's just giving me chills up my spine. That is touching.
So that is something that I still get every day. And
that's awesome.
And this work in positive psychology, and to be clear, the main work I do is through an author called Sean Acor. And Sean is really the darling of positive psychology right now. He's been on Oprah a bunch, on Super Soul Sunday. He's out there in the world. He's got several books on positive psychology. And he's this charismatic guy who's one of the nicest people I've ever met, who also is brilliant when it comes to teaching us the power of this work, how it works individually, and how that individual work on positive psychology and optimism in the workplace can really change organizations from the ground up and in a very fast way.
Oh, wow. That sounds very compelling. How do you do that? How can, if someone's watching the podcast today and they feel like they would like to bring in some positive, optimistic, culture change, how would they go about working with you on that?
So it's really interesting. So we've gone through futurism, change management, innovation, and now positive psychology. And guess what?
What?
They all work together.
Okay.
So that's the beauty of where I am in my life right
Yeah,
now.
you're
is
doing all the fun stuff.
I get to use all of this stuff and teach people, first of all, that if you're going to change the culture of an organization, we need to know that it's change management.
Right.
Right? We need to know that that can be an innovative approach to how you look at wellness in your organization for individuals and the organization's cultural wellness. So my work is I will work with organizations to teach first core teams the power of positive psychology and the tools and skills necessary for each of us as individuals to gain from that. And then when we move on from that, we begin to teach everybody in the organization, from CEOs across to janitors to people who are working in the cafeteria, how they can make their world a little bit more positive and how that impacts the entire organization very quickly over time. To give you an example, one of my best clients is a hospital system in Iowa, Genesis Healthcare. They were struggling financially, and the new director of the organization realized that rather than just fire a bunch of people, which is typically the go-to response.
Believe me.
When you start losing money out of the bottom line, you're letting people go.
Yeah.
He decided instead to invest in the wellness of his employees. Made a massive risk
Wow.
in front of his board to say, I want to invest a lot of our time and money into making our individual nurses.
Well, God bless him. Wow, that's a different approach. What'd the board say?
It's like, all right, it's your job.
Oh my gosh. Well, he was on the line then,
He
right?
was on the line.
Knew somebody's head would roll if it didn't work out.
That's what he did. He
Oh,
decided
good
to
for
do that,
him.
and we've been working with him now since 2017, and they have turned that hospital around. And so I'll give you for a moment just a view of a normal hospital lobby. It's very businesslike. There's people behind a counter. Maybe in the distance, there's some doctors walking around, or nurses, or there's orderlies or attendants and a security guard with a gun. Walk into this hospital, you sit down, you're waiting for your family, and you look up and you see a doctor walk through the lobby, a security guard come by that doctor, and the first thing they do is they high-five each other. What do you think as a family member? You're like, wow, this is different. This is different.
This is different.
And when you see that happen over and over again, the interactions between the employees and the staff, whoever, visibly when you see them interacting,
your blood pressure goes down.
Blood pressure goes down.
Yeah, I can
you
feel
relax,
it. Yeah.
And then you say to yourself, they care about each other.
Right.
I bet they'll care about me.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
And
Good for you, Bill. Oh, you're going to make me cry.
You can go to Harvard Business Review. There's a case study on my project there, written by Sean Acor. And the title of the article is How Optimism Really Works in Organizations. So you can go ahead and take a look at that. It's actually what leading with optimism really looks like.
Okay, I'll put that in the show notes. Can I put that in the show notes?
Please do. It's from
Okay.
2020.
Okay, I've got the URL
It's
here.
an article readily
Thank
available
you.
out there.
You'll be able to catch that in the show notes. So we'll have all of Bill's details in the show notes as well. So if you want to get in touch with him, you definitely will want to do that. And he can take you from soup to nuts, from change management, innovation, positive mental attitude, culture change, and he's an instructor at our local Traverse City NMC, right?
That's right.
And he's teaching us, and I'm going to be one of his students at the Innovation 101.
That's right. Starts on Monday, Innovation 101, which is a precursor to our innovation mindset of a credential long course that we have.
I'm very excited to do that. And so this is the Michigan Innovation Podcast, and you have been all over. You've been in New York, Minnesota, Dallas, Texas. I don't even know where else. How does Michigan feel in the area of innovation, and how does that compare?
Right now, so I spend a lot of time in bigger cities that have a lot more resources than we do. So North Carolina, they have their Triangle Research Park,
Mhm.
California, certainly Washington State. In Michigan, innovation and especially startup innovation just seems a lot more accessible. There's a lot more things happening. While we may not have the scale of the money factor that these other states do, we have a mobility of innovative ideas that I haven't seen.
Well, and that's a different perspective. I ask that question every time, and you brought a very interesting aspect. I mean, your answer was unique, in other words, because you're bringing up a point that we can be more agile at our innovation, and that's really important, and that's very unique, especially for small to medium businesses.
Absolutely, and we have a lot to offer here in Michigan. There's a lot more tax incentives suddenly available for smaller businesses that are beginning to happen here. There's a lot more buy-in from the state level in terms of helping small businesses innovate and try to start
Well,
up as
yeah,
innovation.
you're coaching at TC New Tech in the MEDC, so
Absolutely.
and 20 Fathoms.
20 Fathoms with, they have the Center for Rural Innovation that's really involved there. So most of our state is rural. You think Michigan, you think Detroit, you think Grand Rapids, you think Kalamazoo, you think Lansing, Ann Arbor, but guess what? Most of this state is rural.
That's right.
Some of the greatest innovators I know have farms with barns. Right?
Isn't that the truth?
Think of farmers, man.
Yeah.
They're like, I love farmers, right? We have the ability to connect that level of innovation now with startup financing, with startup support systems, with we have, like you said, 20 Fathoms. We have the folks at Common Grounds with OOPS, with Northwestern Michigan College, and that's just up here.
Right.
Grand Rapids next week is Tech Week in Grand Rapids coming up. All over the
And then
state.
the first week in October, we've got Michigan Tech Week.
And so what's happening is we're all beginning to cross-pollinate. The folks in Marquette are doing amazing things with technology right now and startups. But what's happening now in the last, I'd say 12 to 16 months is we're all talking to each other and we're all showing up for each other. I mean, physically showing up for each other. Now that COVID's behind us,
thank God,
we're beginning to show up. And
I missed everybody.
No. So we've got teams of people who go to Marquette and show up for their tech nights. We're going to Grand Rapids next week. We're going to Detroit in October.
Right.
They come up here.
Yes.
Just this week, the winner of our TC New Tech competition came from Grand Rapids. Yep. People coming from Lansing, from Ann Arbor to come to Traverse City to buy for the money that we have available.
Great. I know, it's amazing.
So things are happening.
It really is. And that was a great response to what's going on in Michigan. So before we end the podcast today, Bill, I'd like to make sure that we get any other thoughts or any other ideas that you have on your mind today.
Great. Thanks. Because so we talked about my company, Krios Consulting, which I had for quite a long time. But as a result of some of the work I've been doing in Traverse City, it came to mind, someone brought up to my attention that this work in positive psychology might be really useful for the founders of startups and their staff as a startup begins, rather than bringing me in 10 years later when the organization's culture is failing and having to fix that. So I've created a new subsidiary of Krios Consulting, and it's called Foundora. F-A-F-O-U-N-D, found, Aura, A-U-R-A, foundora.com. And that is specifically designed to teach neuroscience and positive psychology to founders of startups and their staff as the organization grows, so that they can embed wellness, personal wellness, into the organization as it starts. Because we all know starting a new company is really stressful. There are tools and techniques that we can teach you that'll make it a lot easier for you to survive that arduous journey of starting a business and getting it
Well,
executed.
Bill, I wish I'd known you when I started my business because we just didn't have time. We didn't have the training. We were entrepreneurs. We weren't even managers in our previous job. You know, we
That's right.
were engineers and salespeople, and we were damn good at our job, but we weren't trained or skilled in how do you create a culture, how do you manage people, and that would have been invaluable. You know, so I'm very excited to help you or hear how we can support you with Foundora. That's amazing. And when can we see that?
I'll keep you in the loop. The website's about to be launched here in the next week or so. And once that's launched, we'll have some asynchronous classes available online that
Awesome.
you can take digitally, and also in-person classes as well.
Fantastic. Well, that's amazing. I'm looking forward to that. And with that, I'm going to wrap up today's Michigan Innovation Podcast and thank Bill from the bottom of my heart for joining me today.
It's been my pleasure.
Excellent. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye.